Summer sunlight poured through the towering windows of Ashcombe Palace, turning crystal chandeliers into rivers of gold and scattering warm reflections across polished marble floors. The annual summer music festival had drawn nobles from every corner of the kingdom. Silk gowns rustled beneath painted ceilings, jeweled officers stood beside carved pillars, and musicians filled the grand ballroom with graceful melodies that floated above polite laughter. Every guest expected another perfect celebration under the rule of Duke Adrian Ashcombe, whose calm dignity had become as famous as the palace itself since the death of his beloved Duchess Eleanor 3 years before. Beyond the glittering crowd, unnoticed by almost everyone, a young palace maid named Clara Whitmore knelt with a bucket of clear water beside the marble floor. At 26, she possessed quiet brown eyes, gentle features, and an unassuming manner that encouraged others to overlook her. She welcomed invisibility. While noble conversations drifted overhead, she carefully wiped away muddy footprints left by expensive boots, making each polished stone gleam beneath the afternoon light. As she worked, an old habit escaped her lips before she realized it. She softly hummed a tender countryside lullaby. The melody wandered through the ballroom with astonishing softness, weaving between violins and flutes until it reached the raised platform where Duke Adrian greeted honored guests. His welcoming smile vanished instantly. Every muscle in his face tightened. His hand froze around the crystal goblet he had been lifting in celebration. The musicians faltered as the Duke slowly turned toward the lonely servant still kneeling beside her bucket. Silence stretched across the magnificent hall before his commanding voice struck like thunder. Silence. The single word echoed beneath the chandeliers with such force that even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Conversations died. Fans lowered. Noble women stared at the trembling maid with expressions ranging from pity to satisfaction. Clara's cloth slipped from her fingers onto the wet marble. She bowed her head, expecting dismissal, punishment, or worse. No servant willingly drew attention during a royal celebration, especially not from a grieving duke whose private sorrows remained whispered throughout the kingdom. Before the guards could move, 2 small figures rushed across the ballroom. 12-year-old Prince Edmund reached Clara first, wrapping both arms around her shoulders with desperate strength. His younger sister, 8-year-old Princess Lillian, dropped to her knees beside the maid, tears already spilling across flushed cheeks. The entire court watched in stunned disbelief as the royal children clung to an ordinary servant before hundreds of noble witnesses. "Please," Edmund begged, his voice shaking. "Please don't make Mama leave again." Lillian buried her face against Clara's sleeve and sobbed. "Please let her stay." The word struck the ballroom harder than the Duke's command. Whispers exploded among the assembled nobles. Some exchanged bewildered glances. Others frowned, calculating possibilities too scandalous to speak aloud. Everyone knew the Duchess Eleanor rested in the royal crypt. Everyone knew Clara had arrived at the palace only months earlier. Yet the frightened children held her exactly as grieving children might cling to a returning parent. Adrian descended from the platform without haste, though every measured step betrayed the storm gathering behind his controlled expression. He stopped before Clara and his children, looking first at their tearful faces before meeting the maid's lowered gaze. She neither defended herself nor encouraged their affection. Instead, she carefully brushed Lillian's curls away from the little girl's damp cheeks with remarkable tenderness. "My lord," Clara said quietly, "they are frightened. That is all." "You presume much," Adrian answered. "I presume nothing." Her voice remained calm despite the eyes fixed upon her. That composure unsettled him more than panic would have. Most servants begged. Most trembled. Clara simply accepted whatever judgment awaited her, as though fear had long ago surrendered to duty. Adrian gently separated Edmund from the maid. "Return to your places." Neither child obeyed. Edmund stood between his father and Clara with unexpected determination. She only sang the bedtime song. "The same one Mama sang," Lillian whispered. The Duke closed his eyes briefly. The lullaby had once echoed through nursery corridors every evening while Eleanor tucked their children beneath embroidered blankets. Since her death, nobody had dared sing it within palace walls. Hearing those familiar notes again had torn open memories he had spent years forcing into silence. He looked toward Clara once more. "Who taught you that song?" She hesitated for only a heartbeat. "A woman I loved very much." The answer deepened the mystery instead of resolving it. Adrian signaled the captain of the royal guard. "Escort Miss Whitmore to the servants' quarters. She is not to leave the palace until I have questioned her." Steel armor rattled as guards stepped forward. Edmund seized Clara's hand. Lillian cried openly again. Clara offered the children one reassuring smile before allowing the guards to surround her. She neither resisted nor pleaded. As they guided her toward the towering doors, she quietly looked back at the grieving siblings, then toward the Duke, carrying an expression that held neither resentment nor fear, only heartbreaking patience. Far beyond the palace, where mountains embraced quiet forests, a small 7-year-old boy sat upon a grassy hillside overlooking the distant royal estate shimmering beneath the summer sky. He turned an old wooden horse between careful fingers. Carved into its worn side rested the unmistakable royal crest of Ashcombe. Smiling toward the palace he had never entered, the child whispered, "Mama said father will come when kindness finally finds him." Hidden beneath Clara's plain apron, stitched into the lining where no searching hand could easily find it, rested a small silver key tied with faded blue ribbon. It opened a weathered chest waiting inside a mountain cottage, where letters, birthdays, and forgotten promises slept beside another child whose future depended entirely upon her silence. As the palace gates closed behind the guards, Clara silently touched the hidden key, knowing the first promise had finally begun demanding everything she possessed, because one innocent life still waited for his father. The guards escorted Clara through quiet servant corridors where sunlight faded into cool stone shadows, yet she walked with steady composure, refusing to surrender the dignity the late Duchess had taught her years before. Behind closed doors, whispers spread throughout the palace faster than any official command. Servants wondered why the royal children had called an ordinary maid by their mother's cherished name. Noble guests invented scandals before the festival had even ended. Only Clara understood that the truth was stranger, kinder, and infinitely more dangerous than every rumor drifting through Ashcombe Palace. She was placed inside a modest chamber overlooking the palace gardens. No chains restrained her, but 2 guards remained outside the door. Clara rested trembling hands upon the windowsill and watched roses sway beneath the warm summer breeze. Their fragrance carried her thoughts backward through the years, returning her to another summer afternoon when Duchess Eleanor had still been alive, laughing softly beneath those very blossoms, unaware that time was already slipping beyond her reach. It had begun with a desperate knock upon a convent door high in the western mountains. Eleanor had been returning from a charitable visit when an elderly nun begged her to help a fever-stricken village woman who refused every physician except one carrying the Duke's household crest. Curious and compassionate, the Duchess entered a humble cottage where sickness had conquered almost everything except a mother's fierce love. Beside the narrow bed sat a frightened little boy clutching a crudely carved wooden horse. The dying woman recognized Eleanor immediately and burst into tears. "I know who you are," she whispered. "Please do not hate him." Confused, Eleanor knelt beside her. The woman struggled for breath before revealing a secret she had guarded for years. Long before Adrian inherited his title, before responsibility shaped him into the respected duke he would become, he had spent one carefree summer helping villagers rebuild after terrible flooding. During those months he had fallen innocently in love with a young schoolteacher. When duty summoned him home, neither realized she carried his child beneath her heart. Pride, fear, and political danger kept her silent. She raised the boy alone until illness claimed nearly everything she possessed. "I never wanted his name," she murmured. "Only my son's life." Eleanor looked toward the quiet child instead of dwelling upon betrayal. His clothes were patched. His shoes barely fit. Yet his eyes held no bitterness, only frightened confusion. She crossed the room and knelt before him. "What is your name?" "Thomas," he answered timidly. She smiled. "That is a strong name." From that day forward, Eleanor visited the mountain village whenever royal duties allowed. She never spoke of Thomas inside the palace. She carried books hidden beneath ordinary baskets, celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, and listened proudly as the little boy slowly learned to read every page she placed before him. She insisted he deserved respect, never pity. "You are not someone else's mistake," she once told him while helping him write his name across fresh paper. "You are your own wonderful beginning." During every journey, one loyal companion traveled beside her. Clara. At first merely a young lady's maid, Clara gradually became Eleanor's closest confidant. She watched the Duchess comfort frightened villagers, repair broken cottages, and laugh with Thomas beneath flowering apple trees. Clara never questioned her mistress's unusual secrecy because she recognized goodness when she witnessed it. Over time, Thomas trusted Clara almost as completely as he trusted Eleanor herself. Years passed quietly until winter brought relentless illness into the palace. Physicians arrived daily carrying heavy leather cases. Fires burned through endless nights, yet Eleanor grew weaker with every passing week. Knowing her strength was fading, she summoned Clara after midnight while the palace slept beneath falling snow. The Duchess rested against embroidered pillows, pale but peaceful. On the bedside table lay a worn leather journal secured with blue ribbon. "Lock the door," Eleanor whispered. Clara obeyed before kneeling beside the bed. Eleanor gently placed the journal into her hands. "Everything Thomas should someday know is inside. Every birthday I missed. Every lesson I wished to teach him. Every letter I wrote to Adrian but never dared send." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Why not tell his grace now?" "Because grief cannot teach wisdom," Eleanor replied softly. "Adrian still blames himself for every loss. If powerful families discover Thomas before Adrian becomes brave enough to protect him, they will use the child as a weapon or destroy him altogether." She reached beneath her blanket and removed a small silver key tied with faded blue ribbon. "This opens the cedar chest in the mountain cottage." Clara accepted it carefully. Inside the chest rested family sketches, treasured keepsakes, and every proof of Thomas's birth. "Promise me," Eleanor continued, struggling for breath, "that you will guard him as though he were your own son." "I promise." "Promise you will reveal nothing until Adrian has learned kindness beyond sorrow." "I promise." "And promise me one final thing." Clara leaned closer. "When the right day finally comes, return Thomas to his father without bitterness. Let love speak before shame." The following morning the palace bells rang in mourning. Eleanor was gone. Clara disappeared before sunset, taking only the journal, the silver key, and the burden of 3 impossible promises. 3 years later she returned disguised as an ordinary palace maid, hoping only to discover whether grief had transformed the Duke into the compassionate father Eleanor believed still existed beneath his guarded heart. Instead, after one forgotten lullaby, suspicion replaced trust. Back in her chamber, Clara closed her eyes as footsteps approached outside. The captain unlocked the door and announced that the Duke would question her immediately. Before following him, she slipped one hand inside her apron and silently touched the hidden silver key. Far away beyond the mountains, Thomas waited without knowing powerful enemies had finally begun searching for a child carrying nothing except an old wooden horse, a forgotten name, and the future his dying guardian had sacrificed everything to protect. Adrian dismissed the captain and entered the private council chamber alone, closing the carved oak door behind him until only silence remained between himself and Clara Whitmore. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting shifting colors across polished stone, while the portrait of Duchess Eleanor watched from above the great fireplace with the same serene expression she had worn in life. Clara stood quietly before the Duke's desk with folded hands. She neither bowed excessively nor pleaded for mercy. Her composure unsettled Adrian more than open fear ever could. He studied her carefully. "You knew my wife?" "Yes, your grace." "How well?" "She trusted me." The answer landed with unexpected weight. "Trusted you with what?" Clara lowered her eyes. "I cannot answer." Adrian's patience began to fray. "My children cling to you. They miss their mother. They called you Mama. They were remembering love, not replacing it." Her quiet words carried neither arrogance nor manipulation. They sounded painfully honest. Yet honesty without explanation only deepened his suspicion. "You have one final opportunity," Adrian said. "Tell me everything you know." "I cannot betray a promise." His expression hardened. "Then you leave me little choice." He ordered Clara confined until further notice, believing isolation might eventually loosen her silence. As guards escorted her through the servant corridors once again, Edmund appeared unexpectedly from behind a marble column. The young prince looked from the soldiers to Clara with determined eyes that suddenly resembled his mother's more than his father's. That evening, after darkness settled over the palace, Edmund and Lillian quietly slipped through forgotten passageways Eleanor had once shown them during childhood games. Hidden doors opened behind ancient tapestries, leading toward unused wine cellars beneath the eastern wing. Clara looked up in surprise as the children appeared carrying lanterns and a small satchel filled with bread, dried fruit, and a traveling cloak. "You have to leave," Edmund whispered. "They'll hurt Thomas if you stay." Clara's heart stopped. "How do you know that name?" Lillian wiped anxious tears away. "Mama talked in her sleep when she became sick. We heard her praying for someone named Thomas." Clara realized Eleanor's careful secret had almost escaped without intention during those final heartbreaking months. "You must return to your rooms." "We won't. You have families here." "So do you," Edmund answered softly. The words nearly broke her resolve. Before dawn, The children guided Clara beyond the palace walls through an abandoned gardener's gate hidden beneath climbing ivy. She embraced them both with trembling gratitude before disappearing into the misty countryside, carrying only the satchel, the silver key, and the weight of promises that had already reshaped her entire life. Morning brought chaos. The guards discovered her empty chamber. Adrian listened in stunned disbelief as the captain explained the escape. Anger flashed across his face, yet beneath it lay something more unsettling. Clara had fled, but she had taken nothing valuable except simple provisions. A guilty conspirator usually gathered wealth, weapons, or forged papers. She had chosen bread instead. Determined to uncover the truth personally, Adrian ordered only a handful of trusted riders to accompany him. He refused public pursuit, fearing gossip would spread faster than facts. Somewhere beyond the palace, a woman carried secrets his late wife had considered worth dying to protect. The chase led through rolling meadows shimmering beneath summer sunlight before reaching villages where Clara's trail remained strangely consistent. Every innkeeper remembered her. Every farmer smiled when describing the quiet young woman who had stopped only briefly before continuing onward. "She repaired my daughter's torn shoe," one widow recalled. "She spent hours reading to my blind father," another villager said. "She refused payment." None described a fugitive. Instead they described kindness. 3 days later dark clouds gathered over the western hills. Heavy rain transformed peaceful roads into rivers of mud. Adrian spotted an overturned carriage balanced dangerously upon a swollen bridge. Horses screamed while frightened travelers struggled against rushing water. Before his men could react, a familiar figure rushed into the torrent. Clara. Ignoring the current, she crawled across broken timbers toward an elderly coachman trapped beneath shattered wood. Waves crashed against her shoulders as she fought to free him. Adrian spurred his horse forward without hesitation. Together they lifted the heavy beam and carried the injured man safely onto solid ground. The grateful family thanked the Duke repeatedly. Clara quietly slipped away before anyone noticed. Adrian caught her beneath dripping oak branches. "You could have drowned. So could he. You risked your life for a stranger." "He was no stranger to someone." Her answer lingered long after the rain softened. They continued traveling separately yet repeatedly crossed paths as though fate quietly refused to let either journey alone. One evening they reached a roadside chapel where exhausted travelers sheltered from another approaching storm. Inside, a young woman heavily pregnant with her first child sat trembling beside cold stone walls while her husband searched desperately for a physician delayed by flooded roads. Without hesitation Clara knelt beside the frightened stranger. She warmed water, prepared clean linens, held the woman's shaking hands throughout endless hours of painful waiting. Adrian watched from across the chapel. She moved with calm confidence born not from training but from compassion. Every reassuring word she spoke reminded him painfully of Eleanor comforting frightened villagers during difficult winters. The resemblance reached beyond simple habit. It lived within Clara's heart itself. After dawn the healthy infant finally cried. The grateful parents tried offering Clara their last silver coins. She refused every one. Later that afternoon Adrian found her sitting alone beside a quiet stream, washing blood and mud from her sleeves. "Why?" he asked. She looked toward the flowing water. "Because someone once showed me that love becomes real only after it costs something." "Was that Eleanor?" Clara smiled sadly. "She taught many people how to carry burdens without making them heavier." He sat beside her for the first time since the pursuit began. Neither spoke for several minutes. Birdsong drifted through the trees while sunlight shimmered across gentle currents. Finally Adrian broke the silence. "I believed I understood my wife." "You understood her heart," Clara answered. "You simply never saw how far it reached." Before he could ask another question, distant hoofbeats thundered through the forest. Clara immediately stood, every trace of peaceful reflection disappearing from her face. She recognized those riders long before they emerged between the trees because the black falcons stitched upon their cloaks belonged not to the palace but to Lord Percival Ashcroft, the most ambitious noble in the kingdom. As Adrian reached instinctively for his sword, Clara whispered with unmistakable fear, "They are not searching for me anymore." The black falcon riders burst from the forest with ruthless speed, their horses scattering leaves across the narrow woodland path. Lord Percival Ashcroft rode at their head, his polished armor glinting beneath broken shafts of afternoon sunlight. His cold smile revealed satisfaction rather than surprise, as though he had expected Clara to lead him exactly where he wished to go. Adrian stepped between Percival and the maid, resting one hand upon the hilt of his sword while studying the ambitious noble whose loyalty had always seemed polished rather than genuine. Percival inclined his head politely. "Your Grace, I feared you might be chasing the wrong fugitive." "She is under my protection," Adrian replied evenly. "For the moment," Percival answered. "My concern lies with another traveler." Clara's face drained of color. Without another word she turned and ran toward the mountains. Adrian hesitated only a heartbeat before following. Behind them, Percival ordered his riders forward, and the quiet forest erupted into pounding hooves, snapping branches, and frightened birds rising into the gray sky. The chase climbed narrow trails twisting through pine-covered slopes until the palace roads disappeared entirely. Clara knew every hidden path because she had walked them for years. Even exhausted, she moved with desperate certainty toward the lonely cottage where Thomas waited, unaware that danger had finally discovered his existence. Rain began falling before sunset. Cold mist wrapped itself around the mountains as thunder echoed through distant valleys. Clara reached the cottage first and threw open the weathered door. Thomas looked up from the rough wooden table where he had been carving another tiny horse from cedar. His bright eyes immediately recognized the fear on her face. "We have to leave," she said gently. "Did something happen?" "Yes." "Is Mama Eleanor coming?" The innocent question pierced Clara's heart. "She is watching over us." Thomas nodded with complete trust. He hurried to gather the small bundle containing his favorite book, a wool blanket, and the old carved horse bearing the Ashcombe crest. Before they could escape through the rear door, mounted riders surrounded the cottage. Hooves crushed wildflowers. Steel flashed beneath the rain. Percival's men dismounted with practiced efficiency, closing every possible path through the surrounding trees. Clara pulled Thomas behind her. "No one touches him." Percival approached slowly. "So this is the child." Thomas looked at the stranger with puzzled curiosity. "Who are you?" "A man ensuring the kingdom remains stable." "I don't understand." "You are fortunate." Before another word could be spoken, Adrian rode into the clearing with his remaining guards. Drawing his sword, he placed himself beside Clara without hesitation. "No one enters this cottage." Percival sighed dramatically. "Your Grace, surely you recognize political necessity. An unknown child carrying royal blood invites rebellion." "He is a child," Adrian answered. "He is a future problem. He is innocent. Innocence has never prevented civil war." The rain intensified, soaking cloaks and turning earth into slippery mud. Percival signaled his men forward. Steel rang through the mountain air. Adrian fought fiercely, driving attackers away from the cottage door while his loyal guards protected the narrow approach. Clara remained inside with Thomas, refusing to abandon him even as shattered windows sprayed glass across the floor. She held the frightened boy close, whispering the same lullaby Eleanor had sung countless evenings before. Gradually the fighting turned. Percival's riders, surprised by Adrian's determination, began retreating beneath disciplined resistance. Realizing failure, the ambitious noble glared toward the cottage one final time before ordering withdrawal. Within moments only rain, scattered weapons, and heavy breathing remained inside the clearing. Silence slowly returned. Adrian entered the cottage carefully, lowering his sword. Thomas stared at the stranger standing in the doorway. "You're hurt," the boy observed, noticing blood running from a cut above Adrian's brow. "It is only a scratch." Thomas searched his small bundle and produced a neatly folded cloth. "Mama Eleanor always cleaned little scratches before they became bigger ones." Adrian accepted the cloth without speaking. The child stepped closer and gently pressed it against the wound with surprising confidence. "You should sit down." Something inside Adrian quietly broke. No fear. No accusation. Only kindness. "What did you call her?" Adrian asked. "Mama Eleanor." Clara closed her eyes. The moment she had delayed for years had finally arrived. Thomas smiled innocently. "She wasn't my real mama, but she said love doesn't always begin with birth." Adrian slowly knelt before the boy. "How long did you know her?" "Since I was little." "She visited often?" "Every birthday." Thomas proudly opened his worn book. Pressed between its pages rested tiny dried flowers, childish drawings, and short handwritten notes. "She taught me letters." He pointed toward careful writing inside the cover. "One day your father will come because courage sometimes needs time to grow." Adrian recognized Eleanor's graceful handwriting immediately. His hands began trembling. Thomas reached into his bundle again and carefully lifted the old wooden horse. "She carved this with me after I asked what fathers were like." He placed the toy into Adrian's palm. She said mine loved horses before he loved titles. Adrian remembered carving identical horses as a carefree young man long before responsibility had claimed every hour of his life. Tears blurred his vision. Thomas tilted his head. Why are you crying? Because the truth could no longer remain hidden. Clara quietly untied the faded blue ribbon around the silver key hanging beneath her apron. She unlocked the weathered cedar chest resting beneath the cottage window and carefully lifted out the leather journal Eleanor had entrusted to her final night alive. Without ceremony, without defense, she placed it into Adrian's shaking hands. This, she whispered, is the promise I could never betray. Adrian opened the first page. Inside rested Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting beside a simple sentence. If you are reading these pages, my beloved Adrian, then you have finally become the father our Thomas deserves. Morning arrived slowly over the western mountains, washing the little cottage in pale golden light after the violence of the storm. Adrian remained seated beside the rough wooden table where he had spent the entire night reading Eleanor's journal. Every page carried another quiet sacrifice. She had carefully recorded Thomas's first steps, his first written sentence, every birthday she celebrated in secret, and every fear she carried that powerful men would someday discover the innocent child before compassion could protect him. There were no words of bitterness toward Adrian. Instead, every letter ended with hope that one day he would become the father Thomas deserved. When Adrian reached the final page, he could no longer hold back his tears. The last entry had been written only hours before Eleanor's death. If kindness has finally led these pages into your hands, then do not waste another sunrise regretting yesterday. Thomas does not need a perfect father. He needs the man I have always believed still lives inside you. Love him freely. Protect him openly. And when you find Clara, thank her for carrying a burden that belonged to neither of us alone. Adrian gently closed the journal. He looked toward Clara, who stood quietly beside the window watching Thomas chase butterflies through the dew-covered grass. I judged you, he said softly. You did. I imprisoned you. You believed you were protecting your family. I accused you of manipulating my children. Clara smiled sadly. They only remembered the kindness your wife planted inside them. Adrian slowly approached her. I cannot return Eleanor to this world. No. But perhaps I can finally honor what she gave hers to protect. Clara nodded without speaking. Outside, Thomas knelt beside a patch of wildflowers, carefully rescuing a tiny bird whose wing had become tangled among thorny stems. Adrian watched the little boy cradle the frightened creature exactly as Eleanor once had. The resemblance was not in appearance but in spirit. For the first time in years, Adrian smiled through tears. That afternoon they returned to Ashcombe Palace together. News of the attack had already spread across the kingdom. Noble families crowded the great hall, expecting arrests, accusations, and scandal. Lord Percival Ashcroft stood confidently among them, believing his influence remained untouched despite the failed ambush. Instead, the massive doors opened. Adrian entered first. Clara walked beside him. Thomas held her hand. The entire court fell silent. Percival's confident smile disappeared. Adrian walked directly toward the royal throne but remained standing before it. He refused to sit above anyone that day. Instead, he turned toward the assembled nobles. For many years, he began, this kingdom believed my greatest sorrow was losing my wife. Every eye remained fixed upon him. I have discovered my greatest sorrow was never knowing my own son. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Percival stepped forward immediately. Your Grace, surely you do not intend to recognize an illegitimate. Enough. The single word carried absolute authority. No child chooses the circumstances of his birth. The Duke beckoned Thomas forward. The frightened boy hesitated only briefly before stepping beside him. Adrian slowly lowered himself onto one knee before the entire kingdom. The hall became so silent that the fluttering banners overhead could be heard. He looked directly into Thomas's eyes. I was absent because I never knew you existed. Thomas listened quietly. I cannot give you the years we lost. The Duke's voice trembled. But if you will allow me. He reached out both hands. I will spend every remaining day earning the privilege of being your father. For one endless moment nobody moved. Thomas looked toward Clara. She gave him the smallest encouraging nod. The little boy stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Adrian's neck. I've been waiting, he whispered. Many hardened nobles quietly wiped away tears. Even palace guards lowered their eyes. Lord Percival alone remained unmoved. This changes nothing, he declared. The laws are clear. Adrian rose to his feet. Then the laws will change. His voice echoed through every corner of the throne room. "From this day forward, no innocent child within my lands shall lose dignity because of the mistakes of adults. Every child deserves protection, education, inheritance from loving parents, and equal justice." The royal council exchanged astonished glances. Several elderly lords slowly stood. Then one by one they bowed. Not before power. Before justice. Percival realized the room had turned against him. Evidence recovered after the mountain attack exposed his attempt to murder a child for political gain. Witnesses from the village stepped forward. Captured riders confessed under oath. The conspiracy collapsed before the assembled court. Without triumph or cruelty, Adrian ordered Percival stripped of every title and permanently exiled from the kingdom. "Power without compassion," the Duke declared, "has no place in Ashcombe." As soldiers escorted the disgraced noble away, applause gradually spread through the hall. Not loud. Not celebratory. Respectful. It was the sound of a kingdom choosing mercy over fear. Life inside the palace slowly transformed. Edmund immediately insisted Thomas move into the bedroom beside his own. Lillian proudly introduced him to every hidden passage and secret garden their mother had once shared with them. The three children laughed together so naturally that servants often forgot they had not been raised beneath the same roof. Each evening Adrian joined them in the nursery. Sometimes they read stories. Sometimes they played chess. Sometimes they simply watched sunsets through open windows while remembering Eleanor. No one spoke of her with endless grief anymore. They spoke of her with gratitude. One evening Adrian found Clara arranging fresh roses beneath Eleanor's portrait. "You still miss her every day." "I always will." "So will I." Silence settled comfortably between them. Finally Adrian spoke again. "I understand now why she trusted you more than anyone." Clara gently adjusted one final flower. "She trusted goodness wherever she found it. And so do I." Weeks became months. Summer returned once more, bringing another music festival to Ashcombe Palace. The same crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. The same marble floors reflected golden light. Musicians once again filled the ballroom with elegant harmonies. Yet everything felt different. This time Adrian stood before the gathered kingdom with all three children beside him. Thomas no longer hid behind uncertainty. Edmund proudly rested one hand upon his brother's shoulder. Lillian beamed with unmistakable joy. Then Adrian extended his hand toward Clara. "Would you honor this kingdom," he asked, "by singing the song that once broke my heart, and finally healed it?" Tears shimmered in Clara's eyes. She stepped into the center of the ballroom. The first notes of Eleanor's beloved lullaby floated gently beneath the chandeliers. Nobody spoke. Many cried openly. The melody no longer carried only loss. It carried promises kept, children protected, truth restored. When the final note faded, Adrian crossed the silent ballroom and knelt before Clara just as he had once knelt before Thomas. "I cannot replace the woman I lost. You never should. I do not love you because you remind me of Eleanor." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you because you fulfilled her final dream when none of us had the strength to do it." He removed a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Will you walk beside me, not behind me, as my wife?" Clara looked toward the portrait of Eleanor overlooking the ballroom. For a long moment she smiled through grateful tears. Then she faced Adrian again. "I will accept." The hall held its breath. "But only if you promise me something first." "Anything." She took his hands. "No child in this kingdom must ever grow up believing they are unwanted." Adrian answered without hesitation. "I swear it before heaven, before this kingdom, and before the woman whose kindness brought us here." Clara slipped the ring onto her finger. The ballroom erupted into joyful applause. As evening settled across the palace gardens, the family walked together beneath blooming roses glowing in the amber light of sunset. Adrian held Thomas's hand while Edmund and Lillian raced ahead laughing between flowering hedges. Clara paused beside Eleanor's favorite rose arbor, where a gentle breeze carried the last notes of the lullaby across the gardens. Adrian joined her, and together they looked toward the three children waiting beneath the fading sky. They had not become a perfect family, nor one untouched by sorrow, but something far stronger. A family chosen every day through truth, forgiveness, courage, and love. Above them, the palace bells began to ring, and for the first time since Eleanor's passing, their music sounded not like farewell, but like home.